Okay, so now you have your front end positioned front to back and side to side, because you can move it a little bit sideways. To check the position sideways, I was taught that you take a plumb bob, level string, attach it to the back face here of the #1 pin butt guide in the center and drop it down, and it should land about the middle. It should land right around the one spot. That'll give you an idea how far left or right the machine is. You want to try to get that close, but it can be off a little bit. So once you get the machine positioned right and the height is correct, and before you proceed any further, you need to make sure that the table is good. And what that means is that the leveling rod ends, these right here, are not worn out, the rods aren't bent, all the bolts are tight, everything that has to do with the table pivoting is tight, the table supports are tight, the bolts are tight, the spherical bearings in the table supports, if you have the one piece like here, or the bushings and the pins in the old style, aren't wasted, and that the pillow blocks are in good shape. Then you have to set the height of the table and the levelness. Now what you need to do is get the table as close to level as you possibly can. To level it sideways or crossways with these table supports, you have to add shims. One side is probably going to be higher than the other. You can't raise the low side, but you can bring down the high side. And you use these little Pac-Man washers here. Now, you can use the little 5/16 gauge that you use to check the cup gap for under here. Or you can use a front roller body and lay it across the pin deck, crank the table down, and add the shims to the table supports until it's touching evenly on both sides. Then you need to set the front and back level, and I have found that you need to do this with the spot rod connected, because during spotting, when the machine pulls on the table to move the yoke back, even if everything is tight, it's going to lift the front of the table a little tiny bit. And so what you want to do is adjust the leveling rods, those there on both sides, until the table is level front to back. If you lower the front, the back raises. If you lower the back, the front raises. And because, just like I mentioned, during spotting, it will pull on the front of the table, you want to set the front of the table about a 16th of an inch lower than it would be if it was perfectly level. Then you also need to set the height of the table from the pin deck no lower than 5/16 of an inch here. Okay? This is very important, because the flags, the AMF flags for setting up the table, have to sit flat on the pin deck. And they only do that really at 5/16 of an inch from the pin deck with the table like that. So here's a flag. You can see how it's shaped and how it's flat on the bottom. It has to sit flat on the pin deck. If it's doing this, you're not going to get an accurate reading. So here's one of the flags. This table has already been set up, so I'm just going to show you the flagging. Okay? So, at the head pin position, you remove the pin, and see, there's the spot with the dot in the middle. Take the flag and you slip it over the middle screw of the respot cell and the back screw. I'm trying to do this with one hand. Hang on a second here. so that it's on the screw. Now you can see this particular table, here we go, is a little bit more than a quarter of an inch too far back. This table is maxed out right now. But what you want when you set up the table, like I was mentioning earlier, you want to try to get this point of the flag to be exactly on the dot, as close as you possibly can. The closer you can get that, if not dead on, the easier it's going to be to set the table up. Now you can see here that the left and right, or the sideways adjustment, is pretty good. It's almost lined up exactly with that dot. So you leave the flag here on the head pin, and then you go to the back of the table and check those spots. Okay, so here we are at the back of the table. Here's the 7 spot. You can see I have the same adjustment here. I don't know why the light keeps doing that, but you can see it's off just about the same. So now I'm going to take this flag over to the 10 spot. Now if you have 3 flags, leave all 3 of them in place. If you have 2, leave one at the head pin and alternate between the 7 and the 10. You see over here, I pretty much got the same thing. Now if you have the adjustment room, for example, if your table was off like this, you need to move it forward. So you would loosen the bolts right there, both of them, in the table supports, and slide the table forward. The forward and back adjustment of the table is in the table support. The left and right is in the table casting. Now this table, because the machine, well, I'll be honest, this machine is not positioned perfectly, which is fine. It's close enough though. But what we had to do here, which is really interesting, is the table wasn't far enough to the 10 side. So you can see I have 1 spacer on the 7 side. I added an extra spacer over here on the 10 side to push the table over more to the 10 side, and that's why it lines up left and right perfectly. Now the table can still be adjusted to run really nicely even if it's off this much. If it's off any more than that, you're gonna have issues. But ideally, you want the table to be exactly on these spots, or as close as you can possibly get it. Now remember, the leveling of the table is done by adjusting these tie rods. Adjust these evenly. The table height is set by the clevis on the table drive. The level crossways is set with these table supports by adding shims to the high side. You can't raise the low side. If you have the old style table supports, you can individually adjust each side. And the table height from the pin deck should be a minimum of 5/16 of an inch. You may not be able to get it exactly at 5/16 of an inch, but get it as close as you possibly can, especially when you are checking this adjustment. Now, as long as you can get it at least this close, like this table, which we actually put in about a month ago, then you should be able to set up the table so it spots nicely with no problems. And actually, I can show you that right now with this very table.